My name is Dustin Wheeler. My family calls me Duck Duck, and my love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go. All right, all my duck friends. It's time to buckle up and get ready for the surprise that I've been alluding to the last couple of weeks. I've been in contact with some amazing people, two master sommeliers that have recently released the quintessential, no holds barred, all you need to know kind of a book for Australian wine. So I have two guests. First time podcast interview. We get two, not one, but two master somms that have explored and expanded on a region that just shocks me for the capabilities of what it can give us as wine lovers. I tell you, when I did this interview, I did an intro like this before, but after the interview, I had to redo this because I'm telling you, the information that they give here is just groundbreaking. It's so incredibly exciting if you love wine, that I had to redo it because I want you guys to really pay attention to what Miss Jane Lopes and Mr. Jonathan Ross have to say in this episode. Because what they're giving to us cannot be replaced by anything else. They were boots on the ground in Australia and made connections that we couldn't even make if we booked a trip. This is invaluable. You can't put a price tag on it, but this book is incredible. From the map choices, the artistic direction, the design, the information, it is easy to consume, but also so deep and impactful in your own growth as someone who loves wine. So how did they get to that? What set them up to be these awesome authors that created this amazing book that is strictly focused on Australia? So let's start with Miss Jane. Miss Jane, born in Napa, California, graduated from the University of Chicago. She actually has a degree in Renaissance literature. Obviously a huge lover of food and wine, spirits. She has been a part of nationally, internationally, just astonishing, groundbreaking restaurants. From the Violet Hour to the Catbird in Nashville, to being a sommelier at 11 Madison Park, where she was part of the team that brought the restaurant to #1 in the world. And I could be wrong on this fact, but me and my wife have been watching The Bear on Hulu, and it's even referenced in that show. 11 Madison Park kind of transcends social media and just the restaurant world. It's bigger than just that, and it is because it is and has been consistently not only Michelin 3-star, but just the creme de la creme, especially for American culinary. So she was the somm there. Man, that's prestigious, right? Well, she continues on. She doesn't just settle. 2017, she joins Attica, which is widely considered Australia's best restaurant, hands down, and another top 10 restaurants in the world. Definitely been listed as high, if not higher than that, to where she even passed the Court of Master Sommeliers Master Somm exam, which, as you all know, is something that I'm pursuing and excited about. She's one of only 34 women in the world to have done it, and only 274 total. She has actually also written another wine book, Vignette, the story of life and wine in 100 bottles. So she has every accreditation and experience and just insight to not only write a book, but write a fantastic wine book. Then you have to go and pair her with Mr. Jonathan Ross. Now, what's amazing about this pairing, wine pairings, this pairing, we get it, is Jonathan is also one of only 274 master sommeliers in the world. But how many households can say they have two? Miss Jane and Mr. Jonathan are a married couple. How incredible would that be to go out to dinner with them? And we did ask who gets the wine list when they go out. Listen into the podcast for that fact. So Mr. Jonathan Ross, New Jersey native, has a career working in the New York restaurant industry. He was involved in about a 5-year stint as the head sommelier at 11 Madison Park, which is, of course, tied to Jane. I do believe they met before 11 Madison Park, but is really where their relationship blossomed. He was heavily involved in them achieving #1 restaurant in the world. In 2017, John moved to Melbourne with Jane. Jane beat him there by a couple months, I think, where he joined the Rockpool Dining Group as the beverage director. This is a quintessential premium pillar of restaurants in Australia. In 2017, he passed the master sommelier exam. But after going through that, of course, we could think about COVID and the world as it's changed. So in 2020, John and Jane returned to the U.S. and launched what we know as Legend Imports now, where they import some insane, incredible Australian wines. You really can't ask them to pick their favorite because they're all like children to them. But I was able to get a couple suggestions from them, and I tell you, each and every single one that I got to try was just insane. I got to talk to Miss Jane, Mr. Jonathan for about an hour, and I probably had 2 or 3 more hours worth of questions in me. Their knowledge, their excitement, their enthusiasm for the book, it just is so infectious. And I think by the time you get to the end of this podcast, you'll see what I saw. And if you haven't already ordered the book on Amazon or Kindle or Google Play or whatever it is, I think by the end you might consider it. It is incredible. It's an awesome journey with some great wines that cannot be replicated anywhere else in the world just because of what Australia has to offer. So enjoy this interview, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Alrighty, well, joining us today on the Duck Vine, we have 2 very important people to the wine world and the wine industry, and especially Australia's wine industry, Jane Lopes and Jonathan Ross. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So for my podcast, this is an amazing time. We just finished our tour through Italy, and these 2 masters that we have with us are experts in the realm of Australia, and we'll eventually get there. But there's a deep connection with some great varietals from Italy to Australia, so this is a perfect bridge. But they have wrote a book that has just recently been released called How to Drink Australian. And I'm curious because I've gone through it and I've seen some of the structure of it. I get a couple different vibes, and I think for my audience, when I'm reading books and people are interested in wine, we get a lot of these books that are, here's France, and here's this little bit of Burgundy, and here's this little bit about Bordeaux, and then here's Italy, and here's a little bit about Piedmont, and so on. But what you guys have done with this book gives me like Jane Anson into Bordeaux kind of vibes, the details, the maps, all that. Can you guys just kind of talk about what was the inspiration behind the book? Like, how did it start?
Yeah, great question. So I guess we go back a little bit further. John and I met working in restaurants in New York. and had no particular knowledge or interest in Australian wine. We were working in fine dining, selling mostly European wine. And then in late 2016, I got a job offer to run the wine program at a restaurant in Melbourne, Australia. So we moved over, and immediately we were just really blown away by the industry over there and how little of it we were seeing in the United States. Only less than 10% of Australian wineries export to the US, and it's a pretty narrow set of regions and styles. When in reality, Australia sort of is doing everything, every grape and style you can imagine quite well. So we came back to the US in 2020 and started importing Australian wine. And pretty quickly, we kind of felt like, man, we wish there was a resource that people could use to really dig into Australian wine, because, we remember all the books we read on all the wine regions of the world when we were, studying sommeliers, and they really help you dig into those regions and be able to approach the wines, think about drinking and selling and working with the wines. It's very hard to do that if you don't have educational resources. So we said, well, let's write it ourselves, a little bit naively, not quite sort of realizing the just the extent of which this, how in depth this project would eventually be. But yeah, we're inspired by so many wine books that we've read. We really wanted it to be something that someone who knew nothing or very little or just surface level about Australian wine could pick up and feel like they really got to know each individual region, all the producers. I think so few American sommeliers get a chance to visit Australia that we just really wanted people to be able to read this and be like, oh, I feel like I know what Yarra Valley is all about, or I know what Adelaide Hills is all about, and just kind of get that proximity that is really missing in the United States. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but that's kind of how it started and how we approached it.
Nice. You did talk about how in depth you guys got, and I'm sure we'll have a two-part question here. I want to know, start to finish, how long the book project actually took, and the deep dive that you were talking about there. Can you talk about a little bit of the setup on the book and the chapters and the regions? Because I think it's really unique and well thought out how you guys have done it, from the maps, the hubbubs, all those little sections that kind of connect. And I love the drawings of the producers and making that human connection as well, not just text all the time. So could you answer those two for us?
Yeah, I think, I guess the project itself, timeline, from when the publisher says, okay, you owe us a manuscript, to book in hand was about 2.5 years. I would say the research and writing component was maybe half of that, maybe a year, and then but then a lot of fact checking and a lot of editing and so on as well, and then developing maps and information and presenting things in different ways. And every single photograph on there was handpicked on a Zoom with our designer and publisher from a massive canon of photography. So every little moment in the book has a lot of intention. As far as the depth of it, a lot of the data from climate and production and diversity of grape variety and whatnot, all of those, and amount of producers in a region, rainfall, all those things we sourced from. We tried to make sure that we were using one source for all of the data set, so that if it essentially controls the inaccuracies, because there are always inaccuracies in that data. But if we were taking half of our weather data from the Bureau of Meteorology, and then half our data from essentially an online farmer's almanac, and then you're essentially, a lot of those things are member supported in the sense where producers are reporting their harvest size and so on. So you want to kind of have consistency across that. Over 100 interviews with growers and producers, a few viticulturists and people play kind of other roles in the wine world besides just winemakers. And those were with people that we had strong relationships with, people that we have current business relationships with, producers that maybe we had never met face to face, but are very aware of their wines. Often those were kind of the more historic producers. So like, we don't work with Tyrrells from the Hunter Valley, but, we interviewed Bruce Tyrrell. And, him being outside of Sydney and us living in Melbourne, there wasn't an opportunity to really interact with him in person as much as, say, someone like Mac Forbes in the Yarra, where I actually had the opportunity to work harvest with him for a month.
Nice.
So, there were differing degrees of opportunity to dig into regions as well. The book is laid out by state first in broad sections, and it's interesting. I think kind of as we wrote this book, we realized that, when you go around and you present wine to different restaurants and so on, and they're like, okay, we talk about Alsace in France. We know it's in the Alps or in some relationship to the Alps, and those mountains have an offshoot of the, that Alpine formation in Central Europe. When we talk about Australia and we say, okay, the state of Victoria, no one knows about the continuity of climate factors or geography that link those places together. And that is the most basic starting point to understand Piedmont or Tuscany. You understand that Tuscany is coastal on either side and central in Italy and has mountains running down the middle. And no one had that basic frame of reference or fundamental understanding of Australia. And the taxonomy is state, then region, and then subregion. And in there, unofficial subregions are spoken about quite a bit throughout the book. Regions or geographical indications get their own chapter for the most part. And then there's some scenarios where there might be lesser planted or, maybe regions that haven't come under the spotlight globally yet, that we incorporate into kind of a little bit of an end chapter wrap up. And then the images that you mentioned, we had an illustrator who did the illustrations in Jane's first book, Vignette, do all of like producer profile, profiles, if you will. We wanted to showcase the people that are in this because it's really a massive component of making wine, and the budget to fly a photographer around and take more uniform looking photos of people around the country was not there. Nor should it have been, because we were able to be creative and bring this very approachable human element, almost making it less precious by having it be this fun sketch instead of a hard professional photo.
Yeah, I think the way you designed it's phenomenal. It flows so well. I think if you would have put just a picture of a person, it might have looked out of place in some ways. So I think that decision it captivated me. It definitely intrigued. So I hope people are excited to go grab the book and look at that themselves, what we're talking about, because it is unique, and I'm a big fan. The podcast, my listeners know that I'm going through the court and studying and getting ready for that. For this book, though, talk about what regions are these similarities between, you mentioned for a second like Alsace and some regions in Australia. I think as Americans we struggle with that connection because when we look at a wine list, a lot of times it's just Australia and you don't see any of the sub-regions. Is there anything that you guys discovered during your research that leads to that, or is that just a lack of Americans' knowledge? But if you were to point out some regions that, hey, you need to go here if you love Piedmont, or you need to go here if you love Alsace, could you highlight a couple for us?
Yeah, I mean,
I will just clarify real quick. I wasn't comparing European. We actually try not to compare European regions. So I don't think that there are regions that excel at wines that maybe Alsace excels at, but I don't think we use European archetypes as a parody. But I'll let Jane elaborate there. I just wanted to clarify my statement.
No, thank you. Please.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm still learning, so I love hearing.
I think Australia is, in a sense, sort of defies comparison in a really positive way. Of course, it's very helpful to try to make these comparisons, but what we found, I think Australia's most famous styles are not necessarily indicative of what's going on across the country. Its most famous styles are, big, bold Barossa Valley or McLaren Vale Shiraz, and very lean white wines, whether it's Eden Valley, Clear Valley Riesling, or Hunter Semillon. And those are really iconic styles, and there are lots of excellent renditions of them. But just like anything, when it becomes very popular, there are also sort of some commercialized renditions of those, and even renditions that feel like they've almost become like caricatures, just like extreme examples of those styles. And for us, and we have absolutely have those styles in our portfolio. And as I said, there are many, many great ones. But we're just as interested in all the other styles and regions. There are 65 different growing regions in Australia, and I would say a good 2/3, if not more, of those are very significant, are regions that people talk about, that make really premium wine, that end up on the top wine lists in Australia. And, I think you'd be hard pressed to see more than a half dozen across the United States, So to identify kind of a few regions, and what we always say, Australia, so to get a little bit technical, Australia is a very high UV, high sunlight country. So there are obviously challenges that come with this that people just have to be aware of in their viticulture in terms of row orientation and canopy management and stuff like that. But when it's kind of harnessed appropriately and well, that sunlight can be a huge benefit. And the reason is, sunlight can help with phenolic, with flavor development in grapes while they're on the vine, without necessarily pushing sugar accumulation, because heat is required to do that. So if Tasmania is a really good example. Tasmania is the island state off the southeastern coast of Australia. If you just look at kind of heat summation, like Winkler scale sort of thing, its temperature is very similar, if not a bit colder, than Champagne. So a very cold wine region. But it sees its sunlight hours are more akin to like Palm Springs, California. It sees like 1,000 more sunlight hours in a year than Champagne does. And so what you're able to do is you're able to create a wide variety of a wide range of styles. You're able to ripen a wide range of grapes, but all with really moderate alcohol levels and a lot of freshness. So, one of our producers said to me, and she's actually she's one of the makers of a wine you have in the background there, the Mother Block wines. It's Tennille Chalmers. She said, in Australia, when grapes are planted in the right place and picked at the right time, so right grape, right place, picked at the right time, you get wines of both extraordinary complexity and depth of flavor, and also extraordinary freshness. And I think that's really unique in the world of wine. And as a result, we see that the wines are really appeal to a wide range of drinkers. Like I said, we came from this European wine background, and we really love the wines. But so many people we meet come from more American drinking backgrounds, and they really love the wines too. I was doing a tasting this weekend with an Adelaide Hills Chardonnay, and I mean, everyone, it was universally loved, but like for very different reasons. I've had people say, "Oh, I'm not usually a big Chardonnay drinker, but I really like this wine." And then I had people say, "Yeah, I usually don't drink non-French Chardonnays. I only like white Burgundy, but I really like this wine." And then I had people say, "Oh, Napa Chardonnay is my go-to, and this is delicious." I it was just like you couldn't you couldn't anticipate that one wine could garner all those reactions, and yet Australian wine is able to do it. And that's why we've just really invested so much in these wines, because we see how useful they are to merchants and wine and restaurants to put on their lists. We see how happy they make drinkers. We see what great value they represent. And that didn't totally answer your question, but I guess I wanted to kind of get at the comparison thing, because I think it defies, as Jon said, it defies comparison a little bit. But there are definitely regions, like I'd say if you like Piedmont, you should go to Beechworth, kind of higher elevation, continental.
Completely alpine.
Yeah.
I mean, they have truffles in their vineyards every year.
Oh, yeah.
They make great Nebbiolo. Alsace is a trickier one. There's not a lot of people playing with botrytis in Australia. And it's not necessarily that it you can't there are regions with enough moisture, but it's historically been something that's sort of been avoided for anything but sweet wine. But I would say probably Tasmania, if you want great sort of fuller bodied renditions of Riesling, even some Pinot Gris.
It also has a really stark rain shadow. It just doesn't have the botrytis as well, so you get that. You also asked about like wine lists, right? And that's something that Jane and I really are aware of and sensitive to. That like today you would look at a Spanish wine list and it would have the autonomias broken out, regions, and really separated. Same thing with Chile now, but not Australia. And when we were in Australia before we really started, and we haven't really made much impact, less than 10% of Australian wineries exported to the US, right? So 90% of the producers, are absent. Now, of the regions or the GIs, right, the appellation on the label, the vast, vast, vast super majority of wines that left the country bore the name Southeast Australia, right? Which is anything in South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, and Tasmania. There are 65 regions in Australia so a region is Barossa Valley, Yarra Valley. So all those things that we know below the city or below the state level, 55 of those 65 are in Southeast Australia. So, and that was done because most of those regions are not very highly planted. They're actually quite sparsely planted. There's a handful that are full. But because, at the more commercial level, this isn't an Australian thing. You look at Josh Cabernet, it doesn't have a vintage and it doesn't have a state on it anymore, right? It's just American wine because it's being blended across state lines. The same thing happens in Australia for the entry-level wines there. So when that is, 98% of the Australian wine that's in the country at the time, there's no reason or really ever an opportunity to have wines designated by anything beyond Australia. A book like this hadn't been written since 1976, according to one of the great wine critics of Australia named Hugh Hook. And, a lot has happened in 50 years in Australian wine.
Yeah. As I've told you guys, and getting into more of the wine deep dive, and, you talk about your experiences in your masters. And I think what people don't realize is even with my ability to talk about wines, like I'm barely scratching the surface, and masters and the level that your knowledge is at is far deeper than mine. But then you guys always kind of like, seems like a master or always kind of finds a region where they focus down into and really, really deep dive. When you talk about Australian wines and this wine scene, because as Americans, I feel like from my knowledge, I know Torbreck and Penfolds, and then I know Yellowtail. And so I feel like we're really kind of on opposite ends. And I will admit, Jane, you sent me an email about some of these, but I cheated because I couldn't wait to try these. And so I did have a glass out of all of these last night, and they're insane. And for the value that you get, it's incredible. But talk to us, like, what are the misconceptions that Americans see? Is it just those two bookends? Is it just Foster's and Australian beer, or what is it like? Because I know there is a big desert in Australia, but kind of talk about like what does Australia give, and how is wine perceived in Australia? Is it as exciting as other regions and countries and what they got going on?
I'm gonna
Yeah.
jump in real quick and say it's bigger, better, and more interesting than any other wine country in the world. I bet my house on it. So is Jane. She can go into details, but like there nothing compares. And we could be wrong, but I'll die on that hill.
I will say when I heard Jane talking about, and it was one of those nerdy moments for me, just the complexity of the wine region as you're explaining. It has the temperature of Alsace, but the sunshine of California, and my brain's going, "Oh my gosh, that's going to create blah 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 blah." Without going too deep right now, but that's just something you can't get anywhere else in the world. So I think you're just off the bat, like, I'm excited to dive more. But please, Jane, what were you going to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's something that when we moved to Australia, we felt like, oh, here's another non-European wine country that can make a lot of similar styles to what California or South America can make, maybe with a little added eucalyptus flavor. And not that anyone's actually adding eucalyptus flavor, but you know what I mean, with that flavor in the wines. And we couldn't have been more wrong. In terms of not only the diversity of styles that Australia is able to make, but just that it is truly a unique wine growing region, and not because of the eucalyptus. They're just because of that the climate. It really can produce wines unlike anywhere else in the world. And the Foster's comparison is a good one because Australians don't drink Foster's. Just like Australians don't really drink Yellowtail or Molly Duker. These are wines that are created for Americans. And that's fine. It really, there are so many. France and Italy and Spain have their export only wines, have their bulk produced wines. It doesn't reflect poorly on those countries, but it's managed to dominate the narrative about Australian wine to the extent that people don't know there's other things. And to the extent that it's made it very hard to sell other things because people think, oh, Australian wine, that's all cheap wine, or that's all just really heavy alcoholic wine. And you just have to, we're just one sort of conversation, one glass of wine, one tasting at a time. We're just trying to change the narrative that's out there on Australian wine.
As a perfect example of that in Europe, do you know the producer Keller in Germany?
Yes.
So the limestone is an export only wine. It is
Gotcha.
not
Yeah.
sold, and that's like a perfect example. And everyone does that. When we were in Australia, Woodford Reserve was less expensive than Maker's Mark in Australia. And, the Buffalo Trace that went over or Four Roses rather, that went over, they were different. They were cut at different times. And, Nespresso was different in Australia. Everything is, and every country does it to everyone. And I think the issue that Australia has to overcome is the only expression of Australian produce that America's seen for the last 20 years.
I'm super excited that you guys have taken on this challenge, and I've been diving into some Australians more recently because I want to learn. I'm excited to learn. I think that's why what we've done is we like to tinker, and I'm sure if we really got down to it and asked you guys on some of your history and how you got into it, you would be like, I wanted to learn more. I like to learn. I like to see how things work. And I feel like that's a common bond when you talk about Psalms. It's just not, oh, I like to drink wine. It's the stories behind it and the people that are connected to it. So talking with that about the people, what is the climate like for native or foreigners when it comes to making wine? Is it a pretty like even split, or most of the winemakers all Australian, or do you have a lot of influences coming from other nations?
Australia, European colonists brought the vine to Australia the same way they brought it to the rest of the Southern Hemisphere and Western Hemisphere. And, it's a species of grape that's native to Southeastern Europe, and Southern Europe and kind of, that Asia Minor. And it's all of its kind of the culture that surrounds it is imported like it is everywhere else. But what's interesting is, you've got Australian, wine culture started in Australia the same time all other European culture started, because they brought this. It was one of the many systems of agriculture that came in the U.S. That system of agriculture in particular did not succeed because of phylloxera's presence on the East Coast. It had to circumvent, and go through New Spain and into Southern California for wine really to become a commercial product in Australia or in the U.S. and then kind of widely consumed. In Australia, it was instantly commercially successful because there was no phylloxera. And every original vineyard in each state is in today's city center and is gone. And wine was, when you think about it, wine is the only alcoholic beverage that doesn't require any electricity to make or power or heat or anything. It just happens. And, same thing with other fruits and so on. But it's, so it is absolutely at the core of food, beverage, culture, and, community in Australia. There are, at one point, obviously everyone that was in Australia that was making wine was Swiss or, Italian or whatnot, or really former convicts, from, anywhere in Victoria and whatnot. So, their origin story is certainly European, but today there are Europeans that go there for harvest. There are, Australians that spend a lot of time in Europe and the Northern Hemisphere for harvest. There's a number of European wine businesses in Australia. Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, for example, their Shandong estate in Yarra is exceptional. And we think of what they do in the US, and this is this very commercial, touristy, whatever. In Australia, it's one of the most serious endeavors for creating premium sparkling wine in, a plateau, in really cold parts of Australia. So all of those other exported, efforts in Australia are kind of approached in a more authentic way. And, Australia is at a point now where it's shed all of its self-imposed rules and historic European rules. And it is, at the front edge of experimenting with techniques and, grape varieties. And it's been on the forefront of viticultural technology and research for the last 50 years. It really is kind of its own, and people really own it and take ownership of it. I think of it as it's European wine culture without this massive history or precedent that intimidates people. We do really in-depth consumer things. And if we were doing about Burgundy, they'd all come, dressed a little tighter and a little more reverent, and they'd be a little quieter. But because it's Australia, it's disarming, it's fun, it's more hospitable. And that, we try to keep it in the book. We try to have that in the book as well. But also, I think the wines speak that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the labels. I've looked at a lot of the things that you guys have in your portfolio, Legends. And we going to start bridging that gap a little bit. You guys have a lot of different projects going on, and Legends is one of them, which is a import company. But your guys' mission statement is really impactful. And when you talk about Australia as a country, and it's got its own unique challenges, I think we all heard about the brush fires and the droughts and things like that. Is there a connection with Aboriginal tribes or people that were there? Because obviously they were there long before a lot of the Europeans got there and figured out how to survive and work the land and water and all that kind of things. Did that happen at the beginning? Is it still happening now?
Yeah, that's a important conversation that is definitely being had across Australia right now. Yeah, I mean, there are over 500 First Nations of Australia, a pre-colonial Australia that have been caring for that land for, in some cases, over 50,000, 60,000 years. And so, there's a lot of layers to this conversation, and they are happening at a governmental level, and they're also happening at a winemaker, vintner level. People,
private business level. People are putting their livelihood behind their beliefs.
Yeah, and just from the perspective of land care too, most people who own land that they use to grow grapes and make wine from are interested in preserving that land for the next 20, 50, 100, 500 years. And who better to look to than the people who really cared through that land through several climate changes. We act like climate change is a new thing. The First Nations of Australia, they've passed down stories of surviving several climate changes, like, the Ice Age, like serious climate changes. And so, I think there's a lot to learn from the First Nations of Australia, but there's also a lot to give back, and we need to be having that conversation too, that it can't still just be taking from the Indigenous people of the continent, but how do we give back as well?
That mother block that you have over your shoulder, that vineyard is 10 kilometers from the oldest preserved footprint in the world. It's 27,000 years old. And the family that operates Mother Block is of European descent, and they have no personal ties to any Aboriginal ancestry. But they see that as a incredible privilege and responsibility just to be in proximity of something like that, and to carry on and to be a blip on what is a timeline of literally thousands of generations in a place. And I think what's really wonderful is understanding that is not politicized. It is, well, of course it is to an extent, but it is just, it's something that's on minds of a lot of people. It's not just in the wine industry. And I think it's really special. And for us, it was pretty moving and impactful to come from a place that has, the America's history and Australia. We're siblings of the same country. And we have very similar, past, but it's, we were just in the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina doing this event at this wonderful property called the Swag. And, we talk about this, and that is on the Cherokee Nation. And the access to those stories doesn't exist for us to learn from, to acknowledge, and then to also kind of, move forward. And in Australia, it does. And it's the reconciliation has momentum in Australia. There's growth rather than decline among the population, which, I think we learned a lot about that while we were there, and it impacted us greatly.
Yeah, that's my background. My ancestry is from the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, so you're just in my old stomping grounds. But I have great grandmothers that were full blooded Cherokee, and there's stones there where they're still riding, and it's shocking to think about, like, we have all these luxuries and we still try to figure out how to make it through a day. And you try to put your shoes in, and the knowledge that they had, maybe they didn't write a book, but the way they figured out how to survive is, I think, priceless. And trying to hold on to that.
So I guess, or my name being John Ross, that's a pretty impactful and important name it was one of the two last leaders of the trade. It's pretty wild. And I remember driving past Rossville, because we live in Tennessee now, and then reading a book about it. I was like, oh, that's pretty coincidental and weird.
Yeah, it's unique how humans have shaped history, but it's important to link ourselves to our past too, I think, as well. I want to have a little bit of fun, and Jonathan, you might have a unique answer due to some of your background making some wine. But where I work, we have a wine club. It's about 400 members, and they come in every month, and they drink 5 wines with me, and they take 2 bottles home. It's a fun thing to do, but talk through the wines and stories like the Mother Block and being so close to that oldest, like that's a shoe-in for a wine that we'll probably see in the wine club. But they, of course, have conversations with me, and one that has come up a couple of times is, if you were a bet man and I could give you unlimited resources of money, and you could go anywhere in the world and pick a region that's going to be the next Napa, where would you pick? I'm going to change it a little bit. Where do you see in Australia being the next big spot, or what we should be paying attention to as lovers of wine? And I want to hear, Jane, if you have a different answer than what Jonathan has. I know he made some wine in his past, so he may already have an idea of where he would go.
Yeah, I've driven past some paddocks, as they're called, and said, "Oh, that would be really cool to spend $3 million there on making a farm." Australia, and I think if you talk to most of Australia's growers, they will say that for many regions, the best sites have yet to be discovered.
Yeah.
2/3 of those 65 regions are less than 1% planted of their delimited area. And, I think as we think of climate, or, unpredictability, and, things with proximity to water are usually the best bets. When you look at Australia's warmest years, and we separate out 2020's climate data in the book because that was the hottest, or the most fires on record and the hottest year on record for growing wine, and some of the regions that are on the water on the south coast were actually colder and wetter than they had ever been. So for me, I think there's a couple unique places along the Great Ocean Road and kind of the southwestern part of Victoria. I mean, so there's areas that have no viticulture or very little. So it's that kind of back of the Otways rainforest across the southern tip that you go around for the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. I think as a place I've been, I was like, this would be incredible. It's tough because you've got a lot of south-facing vineyards, so you have the really cold aspect. But I think something like that would be really interesting to explore. However, from a regional perspective, I mean, that area is largely unplanted in places like Henty and Grampians. Gippsland to the east of Melbourne has a lot of promise, and there's again, I think it's like 0.05% of the region is planted. The other coast of Great Southern near Albany and Denmark along the water are really interesting. I think it's the Drinks Business, which is a trade publication, puts out a survey every year, and they analyze the security of a region from agricultural resources and climate, but then also the ability to kind of create things that are in demand from the market. The two best and most advised vineyard land investments in the world are, number one, China, and number two, Tasmania. And Tasmania is I think it's tough because it's been so sought after for a while now that the wines from Tasmania, unless it's owned by a larger business, like, Jance does amazing things to get Tasmania on people's mouths for wine, but it is owned by Yalumba, and being part of an organization like that allows Jance to reach further with a lower cost. The volume allows us for efficiencies. So I don't think you'll really ever see wine from Tasmania at that really entry level by the glass price point unless it's part of a larger organization's overarching business. That being said, when you get into the $40-50 retail range, Tasmania far exceeds the competition at that price point, 30 to 50 maybe. So I think watch out for Tasmania, but know that demand's already and limited supplies already pushed the price up. So if the U.S. is going to get into it, the buy-in is already well above ground floor.
Jane, where are you putting your winery?
Yeah, I definitely would have mentioned Tasmania, but I think, for me, the style I want to mention, which is made well in a lot of regions, but not Tasmania, is Australian Grenache to me is where it's at right now. I'm really excited about Australian Grenache. Definitely are looking more towards warmer climates to make good Grenache, just like they do in Spain and France. I just think there's a real wealth of old vine material that are making some incredible, really medium-bodied, red-fruited, sort of almost ethereal, savory styles of Grenache that are just really stunning and often represent great value. We have a Grenache in our portfolio that's from vineyards that are 150 years old, and this wine retails for less than $50. Like it's really a world-class wine without a world-class price tag. So that would be a style I would be most interested in. I'm not planting a vineyard myself. I'm not making my own wine. But that is a style that I definitely think should be on people's radars as sort of a really exciting and unique style being made in Australia right now.
Nice. We know you guys are married and you're traveling a lot, and I'm sure you're going to some fun dinners, but being that you both have such unique and esteemed backgrounds, when you sit down at the table, who gets the wine list? Oh. Jay did.
Mainly because I'm pickier than Jon is. And he's learned happy wife, happy life. So, yeah.
I'm married as well. I get it. I got a couple quick questions and then I want to wrap it up, but when writing the book, what was something that you guys ran into that you weren't expecting?
This is my second book. I wrote a book that came out in 2019, which in the scheme of things was a pretty smooth process. So there are just so many moving parts to this book. And to me, the most difficult thing, which I wouldn't have necessarily anticipated, was just sort of taking the information we collected from wineries, the research we had done, the interviews, and then, we also had the two of us and a few other contributors who were, doing research or contributing opinions and information. So it was just really difficult at the end of the day to sit down and collect all of that and put it in write a book out of it. And I just, it's even hard to explain, like the kind of 6 weeks I had left myself at the end of 2021, having already written and researched a lot of the book. Well, had researched all the book, had written a good amount. It was just so difficult kind of pulling everything together. And Jon had done the primary research on the lay of the land section, which is of course kind of the terroir elements, soil type, elevation, geography, that sort of thing. And also he had done a lot of the indigenous research. And so I think, even people as connected as Jon and I are, being, married, it's very difficult to take someone else's research and writing and kind of sort of get to the bottom of what they intended it to communicate and then incorporate it into a larger text. And so that was, from my perspective, just what ended up being so difficult, where, it certainly would have taken years longer if I had done everything myself or Jon had done everything himself. But and I do think it's really valuable to have different minds thinking about this and processing it. But it was just really more difficult than I was expecting to be able to sort of consolidate all of that different information.
When writing a book, especially this magnitude, I'm sure if we were to look in your computer or notes or wherever they are, there's probably maybe a whole second book worth of information left out. So is there a 2.0 coming in the future, or maybe a another book on a different country? Are you guys allowed to talk about anything like that?
I mean, the book's been out in the US for a week, in Australia for a month and a half. And it's been really incredible. It's been received very well. It's already gone to a reprint, which is pretty rare for a book like this so early on. And I think that means, we'd love to do another edition and update it. We talk about regions that are emerging that probably deserve their own chapters, but that's 5 years out. That's not now. This book hopefully has a good long tail to it and becomes a standard on wine shelves. And after that happens and that is achieved, that's when, that's the only thing that can warrant a new edition. And as far as other regions, I don't think we have
Jade shaking her head.
No, we don't have the emotional connection.
Yeah.
We don't have the on the ground experience. And I don't think that there are other regions that are that absent in our lives to make such an impact. I think, honestly, those that are likely all in the Southern Hemisphere. But I struggle to find some that have as diverse and robust a production that will also that is absent. I think it's South Africa would be the other one. But again, we'd have to go, live in Cape Town for 3 years and work in their best restaurants and make wine there and work for the airline. And, in order for that to then spawn a book like this at the other end,
Yeah,
I think so.
I think when you read into the book, and obviously it's a deep dive. It's over 500 pages, I think, is what I saw.
496.
496. It would not be the same if you guys weren't present. I mean, you can get that sense of connection. You can get that sense that it's a story coming from you guys. It's not just reading from a Wikipedia page or anything like that. It's very genuine, and to try to replicate that, not being like boots on the ground, as they would say, I don't think you could. But we'll definitely be looking and keep Googling in about 5 years to see what the next thing is on the horizon for you guys. Last quick question. What are you guys drinking? Like, if we were to peek in your wine fridge or coolers, what are you guys drinking these days?
Our wine fridges are fairly empty, except for sort of samples from our portfolio. We sold a lot of our wine collection to start this company, so that gives you an idea.
It was only about 20 cases. It was
still a lot of wine. And that, I think that gives you an idea of how committed we are to this endeavor. But we really, as much as I say I'm a picky wine drinker, we really try to drink and taste everything. We don't want to become, people who only drink Australian wine, even though we love it. So, I love Italian wine, both, actual Italian wine and Italian grapes being made in Australia. And so that's something that is often on my table. I love German Riesling is a favorite. I do love Grenache, and I will say I don't think anyone's doing Grenache better than Australia, at least more consistently than Australia is right now. So those are my kind of go-tos, but always very happy to be drinking and trying new wines and just kind of staying abreast of what's out there. And, I think probably me more so than John. John always says he has an occupational relationship to wine, where I feel like I just really absolutely love wine. I want to drink wine every day. I want it to be part of my meals and part of my life. And just am always curious to kind of try what's out there.
I can understand where Jonathan's coming from. I'm excited to get this next exam out of the way so I can not just drink the exam wines and drink everything that I love in between. Like I love Alianico, one of my favorites. So that's not on the exam, unfortunately, but um, talking about some of the wines you guys have, we do have the three back here, and just from my perspective, they're so unique. The Mother Block was definitely a home run for me, but the cab drinks differently. You can still tell it's cab. The peppery ness on this Murdoch Hills was great. If you were to talk about the Mother Block real quick, what would be something that stands out to you? Did this one kind of come around for you guys?
It's when we talk about sustainability in the wine industry, this is the most, and everyone's like organic, sustainable, these big words that encompass all these things. And Jane and I truly believe that we need to talk about the nuance of each vineyard and people responding to that nuance. And Mother Block is everything from the right plate grape in the right place to ultra sensitive water conversation, solar power, working towards carbon positivity, paying employees above minimum wage, which is the highest minimum wage in the world, and then doing it in approachable style that is interesting and different and unique at the same time, and then plugging into history that is the vineyard that is responsible for the explosion of Italian grapes onto mainstream consumption in Australia. It's all in that one bottle, and it's what RRP is $16.99. I just think that it's incredible that something so delicious and simple and easy can be so meaningful, and rarely do you find those things all in one bottle that's at that price.
Yeah, the varietal composition on the back there, I was thoroughly impressed. I was like, wow, this is a unique one, something special. Just like your book, it is extremely special, and I'm excited to continue to use it as a resource as I go through my learning. But tell people where can they find the book, where they can find you guys, social media, things like that, so they can find out more about what you guys do.
So Legend has a Instagram page. It's at Oz Wine Legend, so AUS Wine Legend. And it lists both of our personal pages there as well. Our Legend website is legendaustralia.com. We also have a website for the book, which is howtodrinkaustralian.com. And we give a few options for buying the book on that website. Of course, the online retailers are always available, but we absolutely recommend going into your local favorite wine shop or bookshop and asking them to order it for you, because it's always good to support small businesses, and you'll be supporting us by introducing a new wholesaler to the book. And you can also buy it directly from us if you want a signed copy. So lots of options for, learning how to drink Australian. And we really appreciate, Dustin, you, giving the real estate to a wine region like Australia, which is still sort of, under the radar for a lot of people in the US.
I'm excited for it. We have an Australian in the wine club this month, and there was a lot of comments of, I think this is the first time. And I said, don't be surprised if it's not the last, especially after tasting some of these. So excited to have got to meet you guys and spend this time with you. I know you guys are extremely busy. So thank you for giving up your time for me and the listeners to learn more about you guys, your book, and how to drink Australian. I think everyone's going to be rushing out to go get some Australian wine now. But thank you guys so much for taking your time today.
No, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. So all my duck friends out there, how incredible was this episode? Again, huge shout out and thanks to Jane and Jonathan for creating such a wonderful book, but also such a wonderful and educational, and as we say here, edutaining experience. Big shout out to them. Please make sure you go out and follow their social medias. Go get the book. Like Jane said, you can find it pretty much anywhere, but maybe ask your local wine store, your local bookstore, support the small guys. I hope our paths cross again to where we can dive in more with them and just drink in the knowledge that they have, because what they're setting up there is really revolutionary for Australian wine. I think you heard Jonathan say it's been a long time since anyone's tackled this beast, and I think there's still a lot more left to offer, and I'm excited to see where it goes. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed. Please check the show notes. I will have all their links to their book as well as social media. Please go support them. They're doing an incredible job and really being a champion for some fantastic ideas that are not just in the book, but how they treat people and how they respect the people that they interact with. So if you do choose to support them, it's going to one of the great companies in the world that really care about people outside of just themselves. So look to the show notes for those links. If you didn't, or you're driving and couldn't write them down, or you didn't catch them when Jane said them, they'll be in the show notes. But just Google how to drink Australian and they'll come up. Phenomenal book, phenomenal episode. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for where we go next. More exciting things on the horizon. As always, I hope you guys had fun. I definitely know you learned something this time. But as always, the most important thing is we got to drink some wine. Until next time, we'll see ya. Bye-bye.